When I saw an Old Testament lectionary reading from the prophet Habakkuk, I couldn't pass that up. First of all, because I don't think I have ever heard a sermon about Habakkuk. Neither in all my years in church nor in seminary, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon about Habakkuk. This seems to be the consensus of pretty much everyone else I've talked to as well. I don't know. Have any of you heard one that you remember before? Okay. So this is an opportunity I couldn't pass up here. As I was preparing for this sermon, I looked through my study Bible, as I always do. That's where I took all my notes in my Old Testament class. I still have it full in the margins of everything I might find interesting about every book that I've looked at in depth so far. And I don't have a single word scribbled in the margins of Habakkuk, so this is all fresh. So the minor prophets like Habakkuk and Obadiah and Zephaniah and Nahum, all those guys, they tend to get overshadowed by Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and all those ones that are called the major prophets. Those books are just way bigger. They have a way bigger footprint in our imagination. You can kind of think about what Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel were about. I suspect if I asked you that about Joel or Nahum, you might have some trouble. But the second reason that I chose Habakkuk this morning is that the prophet offers another perspective on virtually the same events in the same time period that another more well-known prophet is talking about. So, you know Jeremiah a little better probably. You've probably heard the story of whenever Jeremiah buys this field at Anathoth at God's command. So, Jeremiah is in Jerusalem. He's under house arrest in the king's palace because he keeps prophesying. And he continues to just prophesy the destruction of Jerusalem, the capture and exile of King Zedekiah, and Zedekiah just keeps desperately trying to shut him up. So it's a really profound and terrifying moment when Jeremiah goes and he buys this field at Anathoth. On one hand, everything for Judah is about to come to an end. The Babylonian armies are about to come. They're about to wipe them out completely. And on the other hand, by buying this field that's pretty likely going to, within months, be covered with rubble and slain bodies of armies, Jeremiah is declaring that someday there's hope for the future, even here. Now, Habakkuk is writing just a little bit before Jeremiah, before this story that we're more familiar with. He's likely writing under the reign of King Jehoiakim, who was Zedekiah's older brother. In Jeremiah's time, the Babylonians are literally surrounding Jerusalem. The armies are surrounding the walls of Jerusalem, ready to break in. But Habakkuk isn't quite there yet. Things haven't gotten quite so bad. In his time, the empire of Babylon is swallowing up the most powerful empires in the region and is starting to come closer to Judah, starting to encircle Jerusalem too, but it hasn't moved on them yet. This is a time of severe violence in the region. It's a time of complete uncertainty. So outside of Judah, there's terror that's starting to slowly close in. And if you're paying attention, as Habakkuk was, you can see that there's trouble on the horizon. So the northern kingdom of Israel has already fallen. All the stuff that Isaiah was warning about, that the Assyrians were going to come and wipe out Israel, that's already happened. He promised that people would be deported and be taken far away from their homeland, and that happened. Israel is now in Assyrian territory. And you can imagine that would have been pretty scary for Jerusalem. So this is their sister kingdom. This is the fellow Jewish kingdom in the region, and it's already fallen. Judah is the last one standing. Judah's kings are the last descendants of David that are still going to rule, that are ever going to rule, as it turns out. And now, even worse, so they were terrified of Assyria, and Babylon has just completely removed Assyria from being relevant. It's knocked them down, and it's starting to take their place. So for those of you who are interested in the history around this, one of the greatest battles in the ancient history has happened, the Battle of Carchemish, which is where Egyptian and Assyrian armies together, combined, were wiped out by Babylon. And it coincidentally is actually almost exactly in the area where Turkey invaded Syria just this week. But after Carchemish, the empires that were most feared in the ancient world, Egypt and Assyria, were just completely knocked out of contention. They're not relevant anymore. So the world is really rapidly changing, and Judah has no idea what's going to happen next. That's when Habakkuk is writing. But at home, things aren't really much better in Judah. So things look pretty scary outside, but inside it's pretty bad too. So Judah is wobbling. It's dripping with immorality and injustice so completely that Jeremiah and Habakkuk both say that this is why God has sent the Babylonian armies to wipe them out. Things are really bad, and Judah's kings, one after another, essentially keep making terrible decisions. Either they just totally submit to become puppets of Babylon, or they launch these hopeless rebellions against an empire that can just swat them down like a fly. The law, Habakkuk says, has become slack. That's the phrase he used there. And it sounds to me like it's the law, as if the law was like the cables of a suspension bridge, and Judah's the roadbed being held up by those cables of the law. So if they're no longer uniformly tight, if there's a loose one even in one place, things are getting close to collapsing. Everything is just very weak and waiting for the wind to blow and knock it down. People are committing idolatry. The poor are oppressed. Powerful, wicked people take advantage of the righteous and the weak. And Habakkuk's not just talking about the big thou shalt not kill laws, those kind of big ones that we know not to do. But he's talking about the rest of the Torah too. It's all fading. It's all going slack. From God's demand that people protect immigrants to the commandment that people practice Jubilee by periodically letting the farmland rest, by redistributing the wealth every couple years, by freeing slaves. None of this is happening. In Jeremiah, we find out that they go into exile for 70 years because that's 7 Jubilees that have not happened in the kingdom. They've just been forgotten about. So things are really, really, really bad. And it's not, I don't think, a particularly unfamiliar situation for us. So many commentaries point out that Habakkuk is a book that bubbles up in Jewish and Christian history time and time again because it's got a specific historical context, but it just happens to lay really well over a lot of moments in time. It's quoted in Romans and Galatians. Paul really liked Habakkuk and thought it was relevant. And it was a favorite of Martin Luther during the Reformation too. He thought they were in another time when Habakkuk made sense. And you think about it, don't we pretty much permanently have political leadership that makes questionable decisions? I mean, that's familiar. Setting aside party lines, I mean, Congress always has an approval rating below 10%. It has for decades. The last 3 presidents have pretty much always had an approval rating hovering around 50%, and usually on the bottom side of that. And Americans as a whole, if you ask them in polls, tend to think that things are really very wrong. Aren't people committing idolatry right now? I mean, whether they worship work or ambition or nostalgia or power or money or their party, all of these are far more common throughout the week than going to church on a Sunday. The list goes on there of all these idolatries. Isn't there violence in the streets and in the world? The wicked take advantage of the weak every day. People die because they can't afford prescriptions. As we've recently learned, many addicts have been purposely hooked on drugs by pharmaceutical companies that targeted regions just like ours. Because addiction means that money keeps rolling in. What is that but the powerful targeting the weak? Judgment is perverted, as Habakkuk says, so these drug executives are likely never going to go to jail. But countless young men in this city who have sold marijuana or bought marijuana are going to go to jail. Meanwhile, many people work multiple jobs and can never make enough to get ahead. It's not an easy time to be an immigrant, as it wasn't in Habakkuk's time. And the requirements of the Jubilee year sound completely foreign to our contemporary ears. Even though it's, unlike a lot of Jesus' sayings, the Jubilee is pretty hard to take metaphorically. Every 7 years, you're supposed to do these things. But taking care of the environment and ensuring wealth isn't hoarded by a few is not really a priority today. And in fact, those things might just be getting worse. So we can hear Habakkuk's complaint. We can hear Habakkuk's lamentation that everywhere he turns, he just sees something else that depresses him, that makes him cry out in hopelessness and despair. So I just spent the last 2-3 minutes or so beating you over the head with this heavy list of injustices and tragedies. And I bet you can kind of feel that now too. You just sit and think and look around and you can come up with dozens more terrible things. I was taught in seminary to avoid preaching like that because it mentally and physically exhausts people to just be immersed in that level of despair. But the thing is that Habakkuk is really deeply sad. He sees what's coming for his people, and he also sees that no one cares. It's like a nightmare where you scream and nothing comes out. No one responds to the scream. But just as importantly as that sadness, he is really deeply angry. He's angry at his fellow people of Judah who are just moving on with their lives, unaware of everything that's happening among them and around them. He's angry at his political leadership. He's maybe even angry at God. And that leads him to question God, as we see him do in chapter 2. I wonder if maybe that anger, that righteous anger, is an emotion we don't talk about enough in sermons, in hymns, and in church life in general. We're comfortable with expressing joy. I mean, to an extent. United Methodists aren't really usually jumping around in the aisles and lifting their hands and things like that. We're comfortable with a respectful silence. We're even comfortable with some level of sadness in church at funerals and stuff, although we don't like to get it too intense there either. But we see in the prophets, like Habakkuk, that it's okay to be powerfully angry, to burn with rage when the circumstances justify it. So you probably thought I made a mistake in the bulletin this morning when I had us read Psalm 137 again, as you did last week. But I wanted to read it again because it speaks so well to this as well. It's a psalm it makes us extremely uncomfortable. I mean, I think it does if you're reading the words closely. It's violent. It's extremely violent. It's raw. And it expresses feelings that we at least try to push down or at least try to hide in our faith life or as we communicate with other people. This psalm was written sometime after Habakkuk was prophesying, far away from Jerusalem whenever they've already been taken into captivity in Babylon. They've been led away in chains to a place that they don't know, ruled by a people they don't care for. And the Jewish people aren't content to live in Babylon. They're not like, oh, well, here we are, make the best of it. But they burn with a passion to return where they came from, to return to the homeland, and to get real revenge on the empire that burned down Jerusalem, the empire that bulldozed Solomon's temple into the ground, the empire that stole them away in chains, that killed countless of their friends and family members. They've experienced all that, and of course they're filled with a hatred about it, so much so that the last line of the psalm is difficult to repeat out loud. Happy shall be they who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. The Jewish exiles hate the Babylonians so much that they pray to God that someone somewhere murders their babies. I don't think God affirms retaliation like that. And I think that God makes clear in Habakkuk and elsewhere in the Bible that vengeance is God's rather than ours. But scriptures like Habakkuk and like Psalm 137 affirm that anger is a real and a justifiable part of human life, particularly when we're weighed down with injustice, with tragedy, with oppression. So I don't think that being Christian means that at every moment you have to just grit your teeth into a smile. I don't think it means that at all. I don't think that turning the other cheek means that you have to enjoy it. Because pain, lament, and rage are appropriate natural responses to terrible things, and God hears those. I mean, that's the prayer in Habakkuk. That's the prayer in Psalm 137. Psalms are songs and psalms are prayers, and God is listening to that prayer, even if he doesn't answer it the way that the Jews would have liked. And these are appropriate responses because if you read about a kid who died because his mom couldn't afford her EpiPen, you should be mad about that. If you know there's enough money in the world in a few people's pockets to end hunger and house every homeless person in America and they choose not to do that, that could make you mad. If you know, as I do, that half a dozen members of your small town high school class are already dead of a heroin or fentanyl overdose, that should make you mad. If you know that 11 Jewish people were murdered across town just for being Jewish, that transgender people are frequently killed just for that, that should make you mad too. And something that I realize more and more each year that I live is the magnitude of injustice, of pain in this world. It's close to home and it's around the world. And the more I know about it, the more I recognize that it's far more than I could ever grasp, far more than my soul can take, because I know that I can't do a thing about the vast majority of it. All of us together can't do a thing about the vast majority of it. So more learning and more exposure to the lives of other people, welcoming more people into my life, that can sometimes feel like it comes with more baggage than it's worth, because quite often learning more, knowing more people means that you just become aware and invested in more of the tragedy that permeates life. Now, I never really imagined that this would show up in a sermon, but I grew up as the child of parents who were really into 1980s glam rock, hair metal, if you will. So my first ever concert was Poison at the Post-Gazette Pavilion. The opener was Cheap Trick, and Def Leppard followed them. It was great. It was wild. I'll tell more about that some other time. But I remember at maybe 13 years old, standing in this haze of cigarette and God knows what else smoke, surrounded by a crowd with their lighters swaying back and forth, you know. People don't really do that anymore. It's cell phones now, but back when everybody had a lighter, now they vape and have cell phones, and then Zippo. But everyone around me was listening to the Poison's famous ballad from 1990, Something to Believe In, if you've ever heard that song before, where the chorus circles back to a longing that I could recognize then, even in the first year of my teens. And the line that keeps repeating in that song is, sometimes I wish to God I didn't know now the things I didn't know then. And that was half my life ago. But that line obviously cuts way more deeply now than it did then. To me, it's been impossible to pretend that I don't know. When I find out about someone's pain, an injustice that people are facing, or a secret trauma that someone I know and love has been carrying around with them for years. And all of that weighs me down. And you do wish you didn't know sometimes. So why, the prophet Habakkuk asks, do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Why do these terrible things happen, God? But also, why do I have to see them? Whenever I could conceivably have gone about my life without knowing and been a far happier person. And I pray that in my heart silently, usually. But Habakkuk refuses to settle for that. He's not just going to pray about it and hopefully get past it. Instead, he goes to a watch post in Jerusalem's city walls and stations himself there. He picks a tower in the walls and sits there and says, I'm going to sit here until God comes and answers me. And the crazy thing is that God does. But God doesn't answer directly, offering something different instead. He doesn't answer Habakkuk's question. He comes with a different offer. So Habakkuk has already been given visions of terror and darkness and violence that are coming down the pike. Babylon's going to come. Babylon's going to exile the king. But God says that another vision is coming too. And when it does, Habakkuk must write it on a tablet so a runner could read it. I read over that line a few times, and I think what he means is essentially write it on a billboard so that everyone who passes can see this vision. Scream it from the rooftops, take out a full-page ad in the newspaper, hire a skywriter, carve it on the side of a mountain. Because God is going to offer a vision of the end, and he promises Habakkuk that it's going to come, even as it seems like it's a long time coming. The arrogant and the proud will not stand, but the righteous will live by faith. The wealthy will lose it all, and the poor will gain it all. Justice will come, and the world will be turned upside down. God says that it's hope that's coming, that a new world is coming in this vision. And that vision came after a really long wait, after a wait longer than I'm sure even Habakkuk expected. So I picture Habakkuk standing on that wall in Jerusalem, looking out over the horizon, waiting to see God, whatever God would have looked like. What was he even waiting for? So he's looking out over the horizon, and maybe in that same direction that he was facing, against the sunrise, the vision finally came sometime later. And it came in the form of a cross standing against the sunrise on a hill above Jerusalem, where a man was killed but conquered death and hell to live again. And the only way that I can bear to know now what I didn't know then, as the song says, is because I know about that cross. Now the vision of the future, this vision of hope, continues to break through in the little things, in these little beacons of hope. So on one night in July, my first week here, an 18-year-old named Christopher Lohman was shot and killed on a corner right across the street from the parsonage. And at that time, Hilltop United Methodist Church, I think, stood there as a beacon, one of those beacons of hope, as a sanctuary in this community. I thought about the flower blossoms that surrounded this church sign that just seemed to proclaim life in the midst of an absolutely terrible evening. They have that sign in front of, this little yard sign in front of their other sign that says, "Love your neighbor, no exceptions." And I feel like that challenged everyone who passed by to live differently, while implying that it's also possible to love your neighbor. A vision of hope can be subtle like that. And I think Fairhaven, whether most of you know it or not, serves a similar role for addicts in our area. The hundreds of people who pass through this building on a daily basis. This place stands as a profound light in the midst of a deep darkness in our community. But hope doesn't have to be subtle like that either. Hope can also break through as we scream it at the top of our lungs, as we proclaim that things actually can be different, as we live as if the kingdom of God is at hand like Jesus promised, and make hope the centerpiece of our hearts. And the reality is that most of the time our life situations are going to make that seem like a really foolish thing to believe. Even when the Babylonians are encircling our city walls, injustice and jubilee have long been forgotten. Nonetheless, we worship a God who was crucified, buried, descended into hell, and still walked out of the tomb. And when that's what our faith is based on, how can anything but hope be our absolute foundation? Nothing can take that away. So the God who spoke to Habakkuk at Jerusalem's city walls, as everything went to hell in a handbasket, speaks to us today, even as everything goes to hell in a handbasket. But the thing is that we have seen Habakkuk's promised vision on that Jerusalem hilltop. And now the God who once was dead lives forever, and this very morning invites us to join him, to follow him into a future that seems as impossible as the resurrection of the dead. This invitation to a new world, to the kingdom of God, to eternal life, is written on a tablet, plain so that even a runner may read it. So answer that invitation and come. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.